Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second of our three webinars that we have scheduled. And this one, we're talking about releasing the shadow, embracing the light. This is a program that we did for several years, and I'm looking to restart this program now for the fall. And so I want to explain it to you. For those of you who participated in Shadow to Light, if I don't get this right, you'll tell me how I need to do it in a better way. So I want to go through some housekeeping right now, and then go ahead and get started. Again, so this is releasing the shadow, embracing the light. I've talked about this a lot over the years. I've got lots of videos on this. And so what I'm going to do is, in an hour format, we can't talk about the whole thing. But what I can do is give you a bunch of tidbits on it. And what I'm about to do is put into our chat box some links to two of the videos that talk about Shadow to Light. One is a 20-minute video, and the other one is a 90-minute video, of which the 20 minutes of that is a section of that video. And so check out the 20-minute video, and if you're so inclined, check out the whole thing. I'm told that the entire thing is valuable. The recording is this is being recorded right now, and the recording is going out to the people who have registered for the three webinars. It will eventually go out to everyone, but eventually could be a few weeks from now or even a month or so from now. And so you're the ones that are going to get it firsthand. So without further explanation, let me launch into releasing the shadow, embracing the light. The genesis of this program was several years ago. I was there, if you recall, there was a spate of mass shootings in America. In the malls, in the movie theaters, in schools, somebody was getting a gun out and they were shooting at their neighbors. And every time that happens, there's a knee-jerk response. And the knee-jerk response is, we need gun control. And as soon as you say that, there's a knee-jerk response on the other side of, you're taking away our Second Amendment rights. And then the scene shifts to Congress, and people are lobbying each side, and nothing changes. I realized it was time for us to get beyond that. And the way to get beyond that is to dig down deeper into the root. Another genesis for releasing the shadow, embracing the light, was a conversation that took place in downtown Portland about 6 years ago. I got invited, and this is like a mayor's level conversation to talk about racism and to talk about racism in city government. And they had city workers there talking about their own experiences of racism and racist behavior, overt and covert, in the city. And as I was listening to this, I realized that I was getting angry. And the reason I was getting angry is that we had had the same conversation 40 years earlier when I was living on the East Coast at the time. And here we are 40 years down the road, and the underlying conditions that give rise to racism are still there. They're still in our faces. And so I took these two events to heart, and I started to meditate on them, and I started to ask the question, what is the problem? And The reason that we have a problem is so few people are asking that question. They come up with answers just like that, really quick, without even understanding there's a problem there. Oh yeah, take this pill, do this thing, take this workshop, etc., and not look at what are the things that are causing the energy to exist in the first place. So I started looking at what lies at the root. What is the essence of the problem? And I realized that we were facing one problem that had a number of different manifestations to it, but it really was one problem. And that we hadn't articulated that problem yet. We hadn't identified the problem yet. And so therefore, you can't fight what you can't see. And all the fighting that we were doing, none of it was really addressing the core issue. And I mean, people are getting really, really hot, really, really upset. And then, I'm talking about history, but now I want to bring us forward to what's going on in our cities right now in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing, and see that nothing has changed. People are still angry, and they haven't gotten rid of the thing that makes them angry. They haven't even understood what makes them angry. They haven't taken to their own heart what the thing is that's making them angry. I have a name for what the problem is. My name for it is spiritual starvation. And spiritual starvation is being hungry for something. And I call this the hunger for the sacred. And it's you don't know how to get fed. Now, for those of you who have read my book, and I got my props right here, read Creating a World That Works for All, great. For those of you who don't own it or haven't read it, buy the book. And in the book, I talk about the hunger for the sacred. All of us have that. We're born with it. There's something that's calling to us about what goes beyond this, whatever this is I'm experiencing right now. The hunger for the sacred is good. What's not good is not knowing how to get fed, not knowing how to find our own way of expressing this divinity that's within us. And let me be very quick to add, I am not talking about religion. For those of you who don't know me, I call myself a trans-religionist. I honor all of them. I even practice them when their holidays come up. But the essence of what we're talking about, the essence of spirituality, lies in the core teaching of all of them. So I address all of them. And you don't have to address any of them. You can be a deeply authentic human being without ever walking into a church, a temple, a synagogue, a masjid, or anywhere else. So this spiritual starvation that I'm talking about is not, I'm starved to go to church. It's, I don't know who I am, and I don't know how to get fed, and I don't know what's going on. So three elements of that spiritual starvation, and for those of you who know me, I talk about consciousness a lot. I talk about what consciousness means and how do we elevate our consciousness? How do we become more mindful human beings? I talk about leadership, and leadership doesn't mean my title is the President of the United States, or my title is the Governor of Oregon, or my title is the whatever. Leadership means I know where I'm going. And just by that energy, I can help other people get to where they're going, where they need to get to. So let's do this. I want to move us to our slides real quick. And I want to start, well, but we should just start at the beginning, shouldn't we? Okay, so I want to start with a quote. And the quote is by Joseph Wright from his book, Being in Vibration, where he says, our path is the form by which our fears are challenged and the manner in which we face them. So the path that we're talking about is, how do we face our fears? How do we face what in some cases is very difficult for us to face? How do we face our fears head on and unafraid? And that becomes our challenge. Look at how we reduced ourselves to buckets of fear out of COVID. Look at how we've reduced ourselves to buckets of anger out of the George Floyd incident. We need to do better. We deserve to do better. We are the ones who can do better. We just have to get activated. So the shadow energy release process came out of Machelle Wright's battle energy release process. If you don't know what that's about, I will point you to the two videos that I put in the box and in the chat box. I can't spend time talking about it right now. So the purpose of our process is dealing with energy, not dealing with talking, not dealing with psychology, not dealing with changing legislation, but to really start focusing our power to focus at the source of the problem, not the surface of the problem, so that shadow and light work is not at the level of psychology. It's not at the level of behavior modification. It's not at the level of blaming, shaming, or anything like that. The work is to actually change the energy that creates all of the problems. It's not at the level of an individual. It's not like, oh, I'm going to become an anti-racist, whatever the hell that means. I think that what we have to be doing is looking at what is the kind of society that we choose to live in. It goes deep. The process is to go below the surface. For those of you who have an experience in form, you know that's the shallowest part of our problem. What we have to do is address the deepest parts. So we spend time understanding the shadow. We spend time establishing a sacred setting and a sacred ceremony. Now, by that, again, I'm not talking about let's go to church and or go to the mosque or go to the temple or whatever. I'm talking about calling on the deepest level of your own being, your own faith, your own knowledge of the transcendent, and to create a ceremony that's meaningful for all concerned. And in Shadow to Light, everybody would bring, I would have a candle. Everyone would bring an object that is sacred or meaningful for them. Some people had pictures of their children. Some people had pictures of their deceased parents. Some people would bring a particular stone or whatever. We would set a combined altar together, and we did other things. We acknowledge the nature of the problem. And when I get into the shadow in a second, I'll talk more about that. We would open ourselves to the shadow. So I'm sitting in meditation, and at the deepest level of my being, open yourself to the problem. And we did visual meditations, and I'll talk more about that in our next half hour. And the visual meditations and the chants were to bring our energy into coherence with each other, and then to aim that energy at the thing that's producing the shadow. We would have an acknowledgement, we would have an intention, and then we collectively would release the shadow. And then we close the ceremony. The next week, we would get together and do exactly the same process for embracing the light. And we'll talk more about that in maybe 10 minutes. So what is the shadow made out of? The shadow basically is what we fear. As soon as you start fearing something, you start creating or expanding or deepening a shadow. The shadow is the fear itself. So our shadows can get handed down to us. It can be handed down to us in terms of culture. You think about the number of times people look at the shadow of racism, for example. Where did it come from? Well, it came from your parents. Where'd they get it from? It came from their parents. And you keep going down through parents all the way down. Our challenge is, how do we stop that so that you do not spread that shadow to the next generation? It's actually handed down by your DNA. And by doing this shadow work at this deep level, we can start looking at how the process, we can start removing the shadow from our own DNA. It gets handed down by our education and training. It gets handed down by our personal experiences. It gets handed down by secondary information. Now, I talk about fear-free living, but some of the fears that we have are necessary to living in this reality. I had to run an errand earlier today, and I had to cross like maybe 5 big intersections. And at each intersection, I stopped. I looked both ways, and I actually checked the light. I didn't just rely on the light, I checked the light, but I also looked both ways too. It's not that I'm fearful of crossing the street. It's just that I know if I'm not paying attention, if I'm not mindful, I know what can happen there. Some fears are necessary. The shadow fears are the ones that hold us back. And those are the ones that we need to process in order to move forward. So minimizing a shadow means that you're minimizing fear. So each shadow, and we'll talk about the shadows, has a corresponding light, but you can't even see the light until you start to dispel the shadow. So I'm going to pause here because I am not sure where, oh, I got to do that one. I got to do, I keep wanting to shortcut, but sometimes the shortcut is the long way around. So let me share this again. What's the effect of the shadow? So there's 2 levels I want to talk about. There's the personal level, but then there's the societal level. From my perspective, the societal level is more important. I can be really cool with myself. I can go find a nice little place for me to hide out and hide away from the rest of society. And I can grow my own food, and I can just have my own little small gathering of people that I interact with, etc. And that gets us nowhere, okay? What we have to do is expand this to the societal. On the personal level, the shadow keeps us small and unenlightened. The shadow is the thing that masks us from being able to see reality. We cannot perceive what's going on as long as we're being driven and dominated by a shadow. The shadow magnifies our fears, and therefore by magnifying the fears, we magnifies our angers. The shadow is the thing that keeps us from being great. So the shadow shrivels us. Spiritual starvation shrivels us. On a societal level, We create a society that's based on fears and insecurities. We create a society that perpetuates injustice, and we do that blindly. We do that haphazardly. We don't even know we're perpetuating injustice because the shadow drives us in such weird ways. We create a society that is fundamentally unsustainable. The fact that we have the global climate crisis that we have right now is a function of the shadow. How many times am I going to have to say it? It's all one problem. You can't address the problem piecemeal. You have to address it as one problem. And we create a society that is immoral. And I mean immoral not in the sense that there's a book out there, a Bible, a Quran, a Bhagavad Gita, a Dhammapada, and I have them all on the shelves back there, by the way. But a society that is out of step with its own internal moral code, where people do things knowing it's the wrong thing to do. They do things because they're paid to do them, not because they believe this is the thing that they should be doing. Okay, so what keeps the shadows in place? First of all, denial. Oh, there's no shadow. That's one of the main ones. We're fearful of what lurks behind the shadow, so we don't explore it because we're really afraid of what we're going to find when we start exploring it. We hold on to a story that requires a shadow, that if I eliminate the shadow, it invalidates my story. And people would rather die before they invalidate their story about how they're alive. When I have had more time, I talk about that. Look at the videos that are in the chat box. An inability to admit that you're wrong means an inability to apologize, and therefore an inability to seek forgiveness, and therefore an inability to forgive yourself and to forgive others. And forgiveness is the WD-40, the lubricant that keeps a society going. And what I'm seeing more and more of now is a hard-heartedness of, no, that's what you just did. You just stepped on my foot, and that is unforgivable. And this is not something that builds the kind of society that any of us are going to want to live in. If you accept your shadow as your identity, you are in deep, you have a deep problem. So an inability to face who you have been, an inability to face who you will become, an inability to face a loss of community, even if the community is negative. How many of us cling to negative communities because to face it means you're not going to have a community? What you have to do is like a snake sheds its skin. You have to let go of this wrapper so you grow into this larger sense of self and a larger wrapper, and then shed that one. Fear of the unknown. We don't know what happens. We're in the process of creating a society that's never been created on this planet before, for better or for worse. More on that another day. Okay, hang on. I think now I can safely do this. Okay, so let's talk about the shadows themselves. We talk about there being 4 principal shadows. And those 4 shadows have, oh, I might as well share this. Those 4 shadows have a rootedness. I think this is it, and that's it. Okay. And I'm going to move it. So I think it's still, oops, I think I just lost it. Try again. Okay, so let's look at these four shadows as four themes. The shadow of the other. So your shadow of your other gives you things like racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, all the ways that we separate ourselves, nationalism, all the ways we separate ourselves from other human beings when we know deep in our hearts that we're not supposed to be separating ourselves from other human beings. We're not supposed to separate ourselves from any beings as a whole. If we try to deal with racism at the level of race, at the level of the presenting system, we don't get anywhere. If we try to deal with sexism at the level of the presenting symptoms, we don't get anywhere. We have to eliminate the shadow of the other. And we do that by shining the light of deep connection to all others, the light of inclusive community. So our second theme, and these are not in any particular order, by the way. The second theme, the second shadow, is the shadow of lack. And the shadow of lack gives us three related phenomena: poverty, greed, and hoarding. So if you see people who are living on the street right now, and we're in Portland, Oregon, there's lots and lots of people living on the streets. You're saying, oh, that person's impoverished, so we need to get them services, we need to get them better housing, we need to support affordable housing measures. There's all these things we talk about, and none of that eliminates poverty, because poverty is a shadow. On the other side of the spectrum, we look at these folks who are millionaires and billionaires, and what we see is a different kind of poverty. We see the poverty of not knowing how to get fed, not knowing how much is enough, not knowing how to be supported. Once we get rid of that shadow, we then can shine the light of enoughness and the light of abundance. We can create an economy based on abundant enoughness. Our third theme, the shadow of violence. When this shadow is manifesting itself, we see the mass shootings that are going around. We see people, carrying their AK-47s into the grocery store, not even knowing why they're doing it. They're doing it because there's a shadow in their heart, and that shadow is fear, and the way it comes out is violence and insecurity. What we can do is shine the light of peace and security. So the next time that there's a mass shooting, instead of people immediately going to the knee-jerk, we need gun control, what would happen if there were a group of us who said, let's forget about gun control right now. What can we do to spread peace? What can we do to spread security, and to spread it so deep in our hearts that the people who have guns will just let them go? That becomes an interesting challenge. Then the fourth shadow is the shadow of despair. And this is manifested by anger, it's manifested by depression, it's manifested by alcoholism, it's manifested by drug abuse, it's manifested by suicide. For those of you who have seen my TED Talk, you know that suicide is at an epidemic level in our society, and that was before COVID. After COVID, the suicide rate has gone straight through the ceiling. There are more people dying from suicide as it relates to COVID than are being killed by COVID itself. And we don't care. Nobody talks about that. We're moaning and groaning over all of the loss of life from COVID, but we're not moaning and groaning. We're not even concerned about the suicides that were created by our response to COVID. And we can shine the light of fulfillment and the light of deep healing. And those are the challenges that we've got in dealing with shadow to light. Okay, so let me see where we are. I know most of you are saying I'm still in my living room. So, and here's something, it's almost like when fear comes in, we take all rationality and throw it out the window. This is something all of us know, and then we do the opposite. If you oppose the shadow energy, you make it stronger. Anything you give energy to, either supporting it or opposing it, makes it stronger. We have various ways of addressing the shadow through psychology. We have various ways of addressing the shadow through education or discussion groups, etc. But the bottom line, none of that changes anything. If we want to change it, we have to transform it. So the question then is, what's going to transform the shadow? Two things. Number one, shine the light. But right alongside that is remove anything that blocks the light. It doesn't matter how bright your light is if you've got something in the way blocking it. And the blocks in our society, the blocks that lie in our hearts can be easily addressed, but we have to address them. And there are things that we have to do that can intensify the light for us. And those are the things that we have to do to after removing the blocks, or along with removing the blocks. Okay, so there's another couple of hours I can talk about shadow to light. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to refer you back to those videos that I put into the chat box. Right now, I want to switch our gears slightly. And I want to talk about what we've done with Shadow to Light and what I'm hoping a new rollout of Shadow to Light will be. First of all, let me say, I think it goes without saying that we needed Shadow to Light 6 years ago. Right now, I think we need it even more. The situation that we're in has become intolerable. People are desperate for a way out. And none of the traditional leaders are giving us a way out. They're trying to give us a way to manage the status quo. And I think we're way beyond that right now. So we launched Shadow to Light here in Portland some years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I'm losing track of time. Time flies when you're having fun. And it was very successful in my eyes, in that when we were doing our chants together, when we were doing our visual meditation, when we were doing our work together, you could feel the energy in the room change. You could feel that energy radiating out of the room. And from what I was in my planning and envisioning, that energy would radiate further and further and further to other groups, till finally it actually starts to have an effect on all of our society. And along these lines, I was had always been looking for a partner, someone to partner with, because the reach of Commonwealth doesn't reach too far outside my apartment here. And so what I want to do is partner with an organization with a larger reach. And the idea caught fire with the Unity churches. And we wound up doing a pilot program with about a dozen or so Unity churches around the country. And it didn't work. And I'm still pondering. Oh, I shouldn't say it didn't work. From my point of view, it didn't work. From the point, people learned an awful lot in the program. They learned an awful lot about the shadows. They were doing the actions, etc. But I could feel that the energy was not shifting, and so there was something off about that. And when we get to our discussion time at the top of the hour, we can talk about that some. So I took it offline, and I wanted to work on why didn't this work? What was the holdup? At first, our gross mishandling of COVID-19, and then couple that with the sensational murder of George Floyd at the hands of the police. I said, we've got to do this. I took it back off of the back burner, and I brought it forward, but I still have these problems, like why didn't it work the first time? And I had a stroke of insight, and it's like one of those things where, thank the divine for letting me see this, letting me do this. But the idea is blending Shadow to Light with another Common Way project, which is called the Commons Cafe. So, give you a short history of the Commons Cafe. This is something I did in the mid '90s. I had some leftover Rockefeller money, and I always like to. It's nice having leftover Rockefeller money. I was sweeping around the house and said, "Oh, I found $20,000 or $30,000 of Rockefeller money." So I had some Rockefeller money left, and I had experienced the World Cafe. And for those of you who know about the World Cafe, and started by Juanita Brown some decades ago, there's a very powerful dialogic process. And I started wondering, I was talking to her, what would happen if instead of bringing people together who already have a common cause, in terms of deepening the common cause, what would happen if you brought together people who were actual or potential adversaries, people who didn't like each other, and brought them together into a World Cafe scenario? So she said, "Hey, Gene, you go for it." And so I went for it and created something that we call the Commons Cafe, where, depending on the nature of the cafe that we were talking about, we would bring people from different walks of life, especially people who would almost never talk directly to each other. And we would sit them down and have dialogue, for them to have dialogue with each other around an issue of fundamental importance to our lives. This isn't just to talk about, what kind of plants do you like, or do you share the same foods or whatever. This is, what is the nature and direction of the society that we're living in? The Commons Cafe was very successful. We had dozens of them around the country. We had very large cafes. The regular size cafe is between 50 and 80 people. And each one has to be representing a different walk of life. The large format cafes got really big. 300, 500, 7. In Omaha, Nebraska, we had 700 people in the room when the fire marshal said, "You're not putting anybody else in that room." And we had 100 people still trying to get in. And so this was very powerful, very successful. And then I stopped them. And there are a number of people who are not happy about me stopping them. But the problem was, and I want to say this very slowly and carefully, the problem was what the problem that Black Lives Matter has now, and that is that it's not tied to anything. We're having these meetings and people are feeling great about themselves and feeling great about each other, and they wanted to do more meetings. But for what? Just to feel good about each other? It's like, yeah, we can do that. We can have lots of people feeling good about each other. And how does that change society? It doesn't. So I stopped it until I would have something that could tie in to make the Commons Cafe meaningful. Like the next step after the cafe is for you to do this. And so my stroke of genius that was given to me, I don't pretend to come up with the stuff myself. The stroke of genius is what would happen if we tied Shadow to Light with the Commons Cafe. So we would then keep encouraging them because we're doing the energy work that dispels the four shadows. So that at each one of these gatherings, the people themselves will get together and start dispelling the shadows and have this catch on around the country. So that was a major stumbling block for me, the delivery mechanism. Another major stumbling block for me was the funding mechanism. Shadow to Light was funded by the people who came. If people came, it was funded. If people didn't come or not enough people came, I ate beans. The Common Ways revenue was tied to whether or not people came. And that always left everything spongy. I couldn't predict from one season to the next what kind of resources I had to move forward. So along with the stroke of insight about Shadow to Light in the Commons Cafe came another part, and that is foundation funding. Now, for those of you who know me, I'm not a fan of foundation funding. If foundations come to me and say, I want to give you money, I say, thank you very much. That's how I got the leftover Rockefeller money. But I don't go out seeking them for a lot of different reasons, including most foundations are the supporters of the status quo. Now they want to change something, like Rockefeller wants to change poverty, or the Gates Foundation wants to do healthcare, or so-and-so wants to do such and such. But they do it in a very status quo kind of way. They want quarterly reports. They want your proposal in triplicate. They want to know what your deliverables are. Da, da, da. And my deliverable is a whole brand new society. I don't know how I don't know when it's going to come about. I don't know how it's going to come about. We're making this up as we go along, and most foundations don't buy that. So the funding idea that I had, though, is instead of going to the big foundations that can put the millions of dollars necessary to make this a reality, that each individual local group that wants to start Shadow to Light would go to the local area community foundations in their region and ask for the money. Ask for, $5,000 or $10,000, etc. Something that the local foundation can get its mind around. And this is this can be doable, and we'll talk more about that in when we get to our discussion section. Another level of this that has been that's been a problem just in our post-COVID environment is I think it's very, very important to the energy shifting that shadow to light be done face to face with people, energy field to energy field with people. Now, those faces can be 6 feet apart, okay, but they have to be in the same room. And so how in this environment, whenever we start talking about people coming together, we're watching the COVID rates rise, how can we get people together? And I've got some ideas around that, around how do you create COVID-free zones by emulating the countries where that stopped COVID in their tracks, as opposed to the countries like maybe this one that's letting COVID rampage while waiting for a vaccine to sell. And so this notion of can we create COVID-free zones is something that I'm pondering for the fall. My last point before I turn on our discussion period here is the visual meditation, which has been, I think, one of the main ingredients that moved shadow to light forward. And then when we tried to take it nationwide, was one of the biggest criticisms we had for shadow to light. So this is what the visual meditation is. You the group that's meeting with shadow to light will go into discussions and things like that. But we do a meditation toward the end. And what the meditation is we sit in a meditative state in facing a screen upon which I project images. So you're going into your deepest level of a meditative state, and I'm projecting images. And the image has to do with the theme that we're dealing with that particular day, the shadow or the light. Let's take, for example, the shadow of violence. I will start showing images that deal with the theme of violence. Now, your job in terms of being the participant is not to go into judgment, not to get into your head, oh, that's terrible, or that's great, or anything like that. Just to let the image wash over you. And after 4 or 5 images, words come on the screen, and in unison, the people gathered will say, may all beings be well, may all beings be secure, may all beings be happy. The screen goes dark. You're encouraged to recenter yourself and to go deeper. And then another series of images comes up. And they will, again, 5 or 6 images. And then you're asked to do the chant, may all beings be well, may all beings be secure, may all beings be happy. The screen go dark, go deeper, and you do this for some period of time, 10, 15, 20 minutes. And that was, again, when we did these, when we were face to face, this was really, really powerful. When we took this by recording to the dozen different Unity churches, they were, it's at the best indifferent. It's just kind of like, okay, we're saying these words, but I kind of look at these images on the screen, but nothing's affecting me down here. And so there's something that was missing. And again, to this moment, I still don't know what that is. I have some hypotheses. One is that when I was using the projector, when I was showing these to groups here in the Portland area, I would use a projector and a screen. and therefore the images were larger than what you see on a flat screen television, which is what most of the churches were using to project our images. So there could be a problem with the size. It could be a problem with whether the room is dark or whether the room is light. I would, whatever the problem is, I've got to cure that before September or October when we launch this. Let me say one more thing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. We're going to go for it because we have time. So what you're seeing now is what we call the shadow to light matrix. And this is something, let me make this a little bigger. This is something that we use to tie it all together. So by the time we had gotten to the point where we had talked about all the shadows and all the lights, we had gotten to a point where we could understand this. I was about to say I'm willing to give this to those of us who are on the call. I'm not sure I am or not. I will have to talk with some of the other participants to find out whether this will be confusing or not. But down the left-hand column in pink, you see the four shadows: violence, the other, lack, and despair. And then in green, you see the four lights: the light of peace and security, the light of inclusive community, the light of enoughness and abundance, and the light of fulfillment and deep healing. In the first column over, you see that there's a universal need. There's nothing wrong with having the need. The problem is not knowing how to satisfy the need. We have a need for physical safety and security. We have a need for community and belonging. We have a need to be able to satisfy our basic wants and our basic needs. And we have a need for identity, for community, for connection, for bonding, for self-fulfillment. We have a need to be of service. All that's fine. But then when you add fear to the mix, we wind up, in terms of violence, fearing pain more than pain itself, fearing that we're going to be harmed more than the harm itself, fearing that we're going to suffer more than the suffering itself. When I look at some of the ridiculous things that people are doing in the face of COVID, I saw a guy walking down the street with a full gas mask on. I mean, you know, the kind that you have in the Army and Navy store that fit around the back of your head. He's got these two windows in the gas mask. He's got the snorkel where you attach the canister to it, but the snorkel's wide open. So he can be breathing all the COVID he wants, but he's got a gas mask on. It's that kind of thing that fear makes you do crazy and stupid things. In terms of the other, the fear makes us fear the other. We fear difference. We fear that we're going to be harmed by others. And we fear that we don't have an identity or a worldview. The fear of lack says, I'm not going to have enough. I may have $8 billion in the bank and it's not enough. And then the fear and despair is the fear of, I'm afraid of myself, I'm afraid of others, and I'm afraid of this transcendent reality that I call the spirit. So then the shadow starts expressing itself in certain ways: violence, isolation, and armoring, racism, sexism, classism, and every other ism comes from that shadow. Oppression, which is simply an attempt to control somebody else's behavior. And then otherness becomes our identity. So my identity is that I'm in an oppressed group. And so everybody's out there searching for whatever, how can I claim an oppressed group? And in terms of lack, poverty, greed, hoarding, extravagance, and then class, whatever class I'm in becomes my identity. in terms of despair, depression, numbing and paralysis, no future, and then suicide. There's then a denial story, okay? Violence is in our human nature and can't be changed. How many times have you heard that? We must be violent to protect ourselves from violence. How many times have you heard that? I don't see any difference. I'm colorblind. How many times have you heard or said that? I don't know how to connect with people. I don't know how to do any of that stuff. Or our differences are fundamental and can't be changed. And I'm noticing that I'm going, let me finish this column. So mental illness is genetic. There's nothing you can do about it. A person's depression is their personal affair. I'm not going to talk about it. And isolation and loneliness is the price we pay for being in the society that we're in. And so that gets us to another way of looking at the world. Okay, well, I'm just going to stop there. As I said, I want to start Shadow to Light again with these new markers on it, by coupling it with the Commons Cafe, by coupling it with a plan to fund it that is not just based on an individual paying for it, but trying to get communities that are supporting this to pay for it. And I am I was about to say I'm confident, but I'm not. I'm confident that I can do this. I'm confident that we can do this and that I will be going forward with this. How people will respond to it will depend on what the latest stimulus that comes down the road is and what the media is going to say about it. At some point in time, we're going to elevate ourselves past that point, past that media point. I keep crossing my fingers and hoping for the best and doing the best that I can. And then we'll see what happens. Okay, I am done now. And for those of you who have to leave, because we said this is going to be 1 hour, bye. And for those of you who can hang in there, who want to hang in there, I'm going to encourage you to turn on your video, not your audio, you can do that now. And I'm seeing some folks are leaving, and some folks are being right there. And I see a big dog. The dog did not. I didn't see dogs signed up on the forum here. And so, do you have any questions, comments, thoughts, opinions, anything that stems from that? There are two things you can do. One is if you go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a thing that says participants. And if you click that, there's a way for you to raise a digital hand, raise your blue hand, and I will see that, and we will talk from there. I'll call on you and we'll talk from there. If I'm not seeing any blue hands, if you can't figure out how to do your blue hand, you can wave your meat hand around, and I do see meat hands. Okay, so we've got Debbie and Dottie who put blue hands up, and so Debbie, I'll call on you first.
Hi, how are you this evening?
Good. I have to keep remembering that. Yes, I'm doing really good here. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
I'll be very honest. I'm in the solutions program, and this feels very other to me, but I'm trying to allow myself to listen and take it in. And I'm wondering, because I'm familiar with the laws of attraction in terms of trying to prevent ourselves from limiting ourselves, how, if you're familiar with that concept, how this is related to that concept, because that harnesses energy too.
Right. So I hope that I'm addressing the laws of attraction in all the work, and all, I'm sure to say all of the laws of attraction being one of the 12. Okay. I guess the thing that I've seen is people misunderstanding the laws of attraction, to say, if I pay any attention to this stuff out there, it's just going to make it stronger. So I'm going to walk through life like this. Well, you're going to bump into an awful lot of stuff if you do that. The key is not being, not over focusing on it, to recognize, oh, there's a really big mud puddle in front of my house. I'd better put my galoshes on. I'd better get some gravel to cover the mud up. I better do something. And I can be very, very positive and affirmative that I'm going to do something, but I also have to recognize there's a mud puddle there. Okay. And so so looking at the 4 shadows is a recognition that we got a problem. Okay. And we have a serious problem, and we have to actually understand what the problem is, because right now, going out and breaking out the windows at the Lloyd Center means you don't understand a thing. And so it's understand the problem, then resolve the problem, then work to resolve the problem. So that's how I would approach that. And I definitely invite you to look at the longer version of the 90-minute video there, because I go into all that stuff.
Yeah, and if I may, my understanding of the laws of attraction is that we create the world we want to live in by putting the energy out of the world and having that energy return to us.
Yes. Look at the video. Okay. And seriously, and if you still have any questions after looking at that, then you and I will talk about this, email or Zoom or something like that. I'm tempted to get into it right now, but I already said it in the other video. There are people who are acting for you right now. Okay. And they act in your name right now. And they're putting stuff out in the world that you have to deal with because they're acting in your name. And therefore you have to be cognizant of what is not only what you personally are doing, but what's being done in your name, or being done with your tax money, or being done as a citizen of this country, etc. Okay. Dottie, your turn, and sorry if you took a little long there. Oh, and then Eric, and then Greg.
That's okay. Hi, Sharif. I'm going to have to leave after this, so but I wanted to ask this question, and I haven't seen the video, so maybe the answer's on the video. But have you addressed? I mean, I understand that it's definitely in order to change anything, you have to know what you're doing. You have to be able to see what you're doing to say, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to be that way anymore. It's not working or whatever. So I think we do have to realize what the shadows are. But have you gone into how you achieve the light, like the light of deep connection, or enoughness and abundance, or peace and security? Have you go into how do you bring that light in? Okay. Yep. I'll watch the video.
That was easy.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, I'll tell you a little bit longer is one of the ways you do it is to intend to do it. Okay. So the first thing you have to do is set the intention that you want to live in, that you intend to live in a peaceful, harmonious society. You intend to live in a world that is abundant for all and doesn't satisfy the greed needs of any. By holding those intentions, we can move everything forward. And I do talk about that in the videos. So, okay, so Eric, why don't you unmute yourself and
can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay.
When you're describing the shadow to light process and the groups that were meeting, it really sounded very interesting and very cathartic, I guess, is a good way from it sounded like you were expressing it. And is that in the videos that you had linked into the discussion? Is that part of that? Is a description of that in more detail and how that works?
Yep. And if that one doesn't satisfy, I've got 4 or 5 hours of videos. I'll give you another one. and I actually go into depth in terms of each of the shadows. I mean, like, we spent hours on each one of the shadows. Okay. And like let's really get to the root of this. I mean, we like looking at those people with the guns over there as the ones holding violence. But what happens when I'm the one that's holding the violence? What happens when I'm the one who is I can look at Donald Trump and say, oh, what a greedy, despicable person he is. What happens when I'm the one that's displaying greed? Not with billions of dollars, but just a little bit of money that I've got. How about when I look at myself in that way? So it's I think a powerful process, and we can yeah, I would suggest for people to look at the 20-minute video first, because that will get you grounded, and then if you look at the longer version of that should satisfy the rest of it. Okay.
Thank you, Sharif. Thank you.
So Greg and anybody else have there? I don't see any other hands up. I don't see any meat hands waving around. So Greg, go for it.
Okay, I have a couple of questions, but I'm only going to ask this one. Today, you referred to the problem as spiritual starvation. In other talks, you've called it the mess, and I think of it as breaker society. Could you just say something about how those three statements of the problem interact?
Yes. I'm trying to find a way to articulate this thing that sits in front of everybody's face and nobody can see it. We get, and this is something I've noticed in our society, we tend not to be able to deal with the stuff that we can't see. And our issue is, how big can we get? How encompassing can we get around the problem? And then how encompassing can we get around the solution? So I started off in my book. Okay, I'm learning how to wave it. Let's start off in this book with talking about 3 levels of consciousness. That these 3 levels of consciousness are the things that are driving us to either destruction or to creation. First level is the keeper consciousness, the consciousness of indigenous people, the consciousness of our wisdom keepers, the consciousness of the people who have lived their entire lives saying, we are one. We are one with each. I am one and whole. We're one with each other in our community, and I'm one with the community of all other beings around us. Okay, quick story. I was in Uganda some years ago. I was doing a workshop there, and I was talking to a guy who, young guy who was my wise man. So he was always saying wise things. And he would always start off with everything he said to me. He started off saying, no, 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 you do not understand. And he was always right. I never understand. So I was asking him, I knew his tribe was Buganda, and Buganda is the largest tribe in Uganda. But there are 20 or 30 or 40 different tribes in Uganda. And I said, so what's the difference? You know, like how are you Bugandan and this other guy over here is something else? And he started, and he says, no, 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 you do not understand. He said, I am Bugandan. But that tree, we're sitting under a palm tree. This tree is also Bugandan. If a tree like this were, 50 miles downstream, that wouldn't be Bugandan. It's a different tree. Now we're looking at, we, meaning from Western eyes, we look at this, we can tell the species of the tree, we can tell the plant structure, we can tell all this other stuff, but we're missing the point. And the point is this tree fits in this space and it fits in no other space. So he said he married a woman who was not Bugandan, but he says she's lived in Buganda, she eats Buganda, she wears Buganda, she's born Bugandan children. He says now she's Bugandan, and when she goes back to visit her family, they treat her as kind of a welcome stranger. Oh, some guests just came over, we need to feed her or whatever, but she's Bugandan now. And that consciousness of the consciousness of oneness is something that we really need. When you have that, you have a level of fulfillment, of being fulfilled in yourself, being fulfilled in what you do, being fulfilled with how you live, etc. And if you don't have that, we have a situation where we're experiencing spiritual starvation, where we don't know how to be fed. Because we have the consciousness of being one, and then we have the consciousness of being separated from the one. And part of that separation gives us the consciousness that says, I am separate. And that gives me, that consciousness turns me into a breaker. Another way I could have referred to this is the difference between hive bees and killer bees. Hive bees make honey, killer bees kill stuff. And the individuality that says, no, we're not making honey, we're killing stuff. The third group in the book are the menders. The menders are those of us, and I'm pointing to me, and I'm also pointing to everybody here, who were raised in breaker consciousness, who recognize the problem of breaker consciousness, and are pledging themselves to do something about that. In a breaker society creates toxicity. So all the things that we complain about in our society, all the elements that are on page 30 of creating, I call the mess. All the elements of the mess are things that are created from our consciousness. What we have to do if we want to change those elements is to change our consciousness. So I am calling these things these different names because I haven't come up with, or haven't found the single phrase that regular people can understand that gets us to look at creating a society of deeply fulfilled people. Gets us to looking at what I'm calling in our pathways to awakening, becoming true human beings. So back to the keepers, every keepers group has a name for themselves. They can call themselves the Lakota, or they call themselves the Seminole, or they call themselves the Cherokee, or they call themselves the Bugandans, or they call themselves the whatevers. And in their language, it always means the people. So we are the people. So there's the people, then there's the caribou, then there's the salmon, and then there's the tree, and then there's and so we need to become the people. We need to have a connection with each other. We need to have a connection with the earth. We need to actually have a connection with ourselves. And all these things are possible when we recognize what we need to do from our core, how we need to live from our core. And I could keep going on and on and on with that, because it's a very powerful set of questions there. But I won't, because I see another hand up. Robin, I see your hand is up. If you are there.
Oh gosh, you've talked about an awful lot tonight, and my mind is still like spinning around. But I keep coming to this idea that when we are talking about problems and solutions, that, you know, the saying, we can't solve the problem at the level of the problem. That it's more about coming underneath the problem to, which I think you keep saying, to the core issue. So for example, if we're talking about despair, suicide, so on, the core underneath that is grief, right? And so
I hear you, but I'm not sure I agree with that, but keep going.
Oh boy, I think so. I think there's so much grief. So, all right, but let me use it as an example. So grief is not a problem. Grief is normal. It's a normal reaction to all the pain and the loss and so forth. So working with that is not about helping people fix it. It's about going through it. And a lot of that can be done at an energy level, you know, energetic work. But it's also about letting everything break apart into a million pieces instead of giving it any resistance, so that we're going through this process of mending separation from myself, and mending separation from others, and mending separation from spirit, which I keep hearing you say is kind of a thread throughout all this. So I don't have a concise question or thought here, but that's where my mind is going as I'm listening.
Okay. If I can respond to some of that. When I was somewhere around 11 years old, I got politically active. I participated in my first demonstration, and then founded the organization Black People's Unity. Helped to found it. It was not all my fault. And somewhere around there, around 12 or 13 years old, I became an alcoholic, and was pretty hardcore into alcohol till I was about 16 or 17. for some reason, my mother allowed me to drink in the house, which all the other kids in school thought that was the coolest thing. Oh, you can drink in front of his mom, you know. And I didn't have the discernment to be able to see what it was doing to me. Full-blown alcoholic by 16, lines all over my face, gray hair at 16. And it was a bleeding ulcer that had me make the transition from alcohol to drugs because drugs are better for your stomach. Something was wrong, okay? But I couldn't identify it as grief. You know, there was something deeply misseated. Now, years later, after I had cleaned up my act, after I got rid of the alcohol, we got rid of the drugs, did all of that stuff, I came across a quote. And to this day, I can't find out who said it. If anybody knows it, then let me know. And the quote is that alcohol and drugs are the mystical experiences of the ignorant. And when I heard that, it was like this aha. Because what I was looking for was a mystical experience. And I was profoundly ignorant. I was spiritually searching, and I kept going from one religious group to the other religious group, and this, what I was looking for isn't in any of them. And so my challenge, okay, is that I needed to get myself grounded in a sense of spirit. Now, I think the same thing is true. I think the same thing is true today, even though we become a lot more knowledgeable about, I knew nothing about Eastern religions. I knew nothing about Buddhism. That stuff didn't even exist on the radar screen. This was pre-Beatles. That will tell you something. So our challenge is, how do we find all of the different ways that we're starved, ways that we don't even have language for, and help each other get fed? I mean, that I think is our challenge. Okay, I don't know if that responded, Robin, to what you were saying, but I also am going to look for other hands. We're coming up on the bottom of the hour. I'm willing to go longer, but I'm also, if we're reaching a fruition point, then I am going to and Greg, I see your hand. I'm waiting to see if there's anybody who has not talked or asked anything first. Going once, going twice, going to Greg.
Okay, I want you to talk about death. When death is not a shadow, but the fear of death is the shadow, as far as I understand it. So could you say more about how that functions and what is the corresponding light?
Yes, and I'm going to put up another, let's see if I can do this and talk at the same, chew gum and talk at the same time. Did everybody get the links I sent to about the movies? They're in your chat box? Okay. I'm going to type in the word grief walker. And if you Google that word, you will come across a very powerful video on the subject of death and dying. I think it will be probably one of the most important 90 minutes you've spent. And it's about a guy named Stephen Jenkinson, who is referred to as the grief walker, who helps people to deal with this notion of death. Stephen says we live in a death-phobic society. We're a society that is afraid of the most natural process on our planet. And we resist the most natural process that's on our planet. It's just another level of our denial. We will do anything to cling to life, as opposed to knowing when our time is up and knowing when it's time for us to move on, move forward, move around, move it however you want to say it. So along with all of the other fears we've got, fear of the other, a fear of violence, the fear of depression that leads to more depression. Along with all of that, there is the shadow of death. I've resisted making that a fifth shadow. But I think it's really, really important that we get to a point of recognizing the fear and accepting, opening ourselves to the notion of that I have a term, I have a period, I have a process. And when I get to the top end of that process, this hunk of meat will drop dead. This hunk of meat won't be here anymore. Hopefully you'll do something before it starts smelling. You know, it can get really ugly in here, you know. But what we can do is recognize that I go on. I don't need the meat anymore, okay? Now, each and every wisdom tradition says this. I don't care whether it's Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, anything. There's a continuation, and nobody believes it. So, what happens when you act that way? When you act like you continue on? Well, you just don't get attached to the hunk of meat, and at that point, what Stephen Jenkinson says is, you know when your time comes. You know when it's time for you to transit. I've been in a number of life-threatening situations, and in each one of the situations, I ask the question, is this my time to go? Is it time for, does the universe need these cells for something else? Okay. And if so, I'm okay. And if not, I'm okay. And so once we get to that point, we can take actions that are not, oh, I'm so afraid of dying, I can't do this or that or the other. And we can live our lives much more expansively. So I don't know if that responds or not. Celeste, did I see your hand? Is that your hand over there? Okay, cool.
Remember from Unity?
Indeed I do. Indeed I do. And you know, our group there, the group that we had at Unity here in Portland was the template for the other dozen groups around the country. So this was a very important group we had. So yes.
But I just wanted to speak a little bit on death. And I remember as my great-great-grandmother, how I learned from her as hearing her say that one of these days I'm going to lay this body down.
Mm-hmm.
And as a little girl, I would wonder, well, how is she going to lay her body down?
Yeah, right. How's this work?
Yeah. But I come to realize what she meant now that I know, because this is the body is just our form. It's like air in a sponge.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
are the air in the sponge,
Mhm.
and we should never fear death because. And I was with a patient once that she told me this because I used to do home care for her, and she said, "Honey," she said, "death is just like being born again, just like
Mhm.
being born." She said, "Death is nothing to fear." And I was with her about an hour or so before she passed. I went in the room to check on her, and she was sitting up in the bed. She was looking at me laughing. She said, "Honey, did you think I was already dead?" And I said, "No."
Not yet, not yet. Give me a minute. Okay.
But the thing is, for me, I talk about it. I live that way. I don't. That keeps me from having any fear. I don't fear death. And I was talking to someone about this morning, and I was telling her that for me, I feel like it's when I wake up, it would be my life here on earth would be just like a dream. I remember it's just like I went to sleep and I woke up on the other side still being here because we don't really go anywhere,
Mhm.
but we just change, I would say, going from, it's like when you go to sleep at night and you dream, you leave the body, which is called the, what is it, the astra, and
Mhm.
and it's like the civil cord that the Bible talks about, that you go away, but you're still attached to that cord,
Mhm.
and you can just go away. You dream. I goes out and visit, but
Mhm.
until if that cord is uh, cut or broken, then that is when what we call death occurs.
Yeah. So,
And
so it,
even when we're under anesthesia or whatever, we
mhm.
go out and we come back
Yeah.
until that. So I would just like to say that for me, I see no fear in death.
Mhm.
It's just just like she told me. It's just like rebirth. We
Mhm.
come and we go.
Yeah.
And I think about it. I was telling a friend, I said, what would you think if everybody that ever lived on the face of this earth was still here? Would you like it? Would you like to still come back and
it would get a bit crowded, number one. Number two, there's some folks I'm not ready to see again. Okay.
Yeah,
There's some folks I thought I'd worked everything out, but then I have to work it all out again. Okay.
right. Yeah.
Um, and I say a couple of things regarding what you just shared with us, and I want to thank you for sharing that. Um, I've seen the movie Grief Walker. Oh, there are two versions of it on. If you Google it, there's a free version that comes out of Canada. Look for the free version, not the one you have to pay for. Um, and So I've seen it about 7 or 8 times, and I think I've gotten something good and new out of each and every time I've seen it. Okay. Um, and so one of the things that Jenkinson says over and over again, if you haven't reconciled yourself to your death, how can you be alive? And he says, if you've got to hear from a doctor that you're dying, you're not really alive. You will know when it's your time for your body to shut down and to go on. And
Yeah.
I would I've just finished my third book on the life of Mary Magdalene, and therefore someone I would commend all of us to pay attention to. I'm actually thinking about doing a webinar just on Mary Magdalene, which is, and I'm not even Christian, so I should say I'm not any more Christian than anything else. But this notion of what actually happened in the time of from Jesus's crucifixion to the time of his return and what that means, and how just about every Christian misunderstands it. That it's not about the fact that your physical body comes back, so I get to go and party some more, you know. It has to do with the transfiguring quality of love and how that dynamic is, there's actually a phrase in the Bible where it says this, that love is as strong as death, and that you can generate love to the point that death becomes immaterial. And that's when you live forever, and it has nothing to do with a hunk of meat. Okay, this is really powerful stuff, and I have no idea how we got on the subject. Oh, it's Greg's fault. Okay, we'll blame him. Okay, so let's. I don't think there are any other questions or thoughts or anything like that. I don't see any more meat waving around. So let me wave mine around then and say goodbye. Thank you very, very much. I am honored as usual to be with you, and we should all turn on our videos and turn on our audio so that we can say goodbye to each other, and say goodbye to all the folks that are going to be watching this by the recording that will come out as soon as I can process it. And that gave you time for all the folks who are going to be saying goodbye to turn on their audio. So goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.
Bye, thank you.
Everybody.
Bye. Thank you, Sherry.
Next time.
Yep. We'll talk to you all at another point, maybe next week. Okay, bye.
Bye.